Welcome to the debate. Imagine handing your resume to a recruiter, taking a quick breath, and then walking into a room to present a completely different narrative to a hiring manager.
Right. A totally different spin on your own history.
Exactly. Now, if you step back and look at those two different documents, those two versions, are you lying to one of them? Are you just, speaking two different languages? Or have you completely lost track of your own professional identity?
Which happens to a lot of people, frankly.
It really does. So today, we're looking at the concept of rendering within the living professional record framework. Specifically, we're dissecting what happens when you have to adapt your professional history for vastly different audiences.
And it's a huge challenge.
It is. And I'll be arguing that different renderings of the exact same truth are not only honest, but they're an absolute practical necessity for effective communication, provided, of course, that they are anchored to a single governed source.
And I'll be taking the stance that while tailoring your history, sounds great on paper, high variance in these professional surfaces flirts with a really dangerous kind of ambiguity. I believe that heavily altering your story to appease different audiences, it risks creating a fragmented reality.
Fragmented in what way?
In a way where the holistic truth just gets lost in translation. You end up being 5 different professionals to 5 different people.
Okay, well, let's lay out the foundation here, because the framework actually gives us a very clear, deliberate standard for this. The core rule, right from the text, is this. Different renderings can be truthful when they come from the same governed source.
Okay, but let's break down what that actually looks like.
Right. Think about how we communicate in the real world. A resume bullet may compress a massive project into one line. A LinkedIn paragraph may explain that same project publicly to a broader audience.
Sure, those are 2 very different mediums.
Exactly. An interview answer may rehydrate the details. A portfolio summary may contextualize the visual evidence, and a referral message may carry trust. These surfaces might look incredibly different from one another.
Very different.
But they do not need to be identical. They just need to remain accountable to the same underlying record.
Hold on. The moment you say they do not need to be identical, you are opening the door to manipulation.
Not manipulation, selection. The source stays governed. The surface changes for the audience and the purpose. Rendering is not invention. It's governed selection.
Governed selection, right.
Yeah, because your underlying record remains strictly accountable to facts and evidence. Altering the surface for a busy recruiter versus, say, a public networking audience, it's the only logical way to answer the essential question, which is, what version of the truth belongs here?
I hear your defense of the theory, I really do, but let's look at the actual human behavior this encourages. The concept of governed selection sounds airtight if we're robots.
Well, not robots, obviously.
Exactly. But the act of heavily altering your surface based on whoever happens to be sitting across from you, it is inherently risky. Every time you leave out context, every time you adjust a metric to make it sound punchier or apply a public safe filter to appease an NDA, you are actively creating a fragmented narrative.
But you're assuming that adjusting for an audience means abandoning the truth.
I'm saying it blurs the lines of what actually happened. Picture a hiring manager who sees a highly compressed, streamlined resume, right? It looks incredibly strategic.
Sure, it gets them in the door.
But then they cross-reference it with a heavily contextualized in-the-weeds portfolio, or they hear the person speak in an interview and the story suddenly sounds much smaller, much more tactical.
I wouldn't say smaller, necessarily.
But it can be, and the disconnect between those two surfaces instantly erodes trust. Truth isn't just a matter of what is technically, legally supported by some hidden database in your basement.
Okay, that's a bit extreme, but go on.
It requires a holistic, recognizable integrity. If you tailor too much, you run the risk of becoming a chameleon, where your true professional identity is just lost in a sea of custom-built masks.
All right, let's flip that assumption for a second. Instead of looking at this purely philosophically, let's break down the actual mechanical process of drafting these surfaces.
Sure, let's get into the mechanics.
Let's look at compression versus rehydration, because I think that really clears up the whole chameleon worry.
Okay, lay it out.
The framework gives us this really practical example of an onboarding checklist. So a professional is working at a company dealing with chaotic, high turnover. They notice managers are constantly losing track of how to train new hires.
A very common scenario.
Right. So they gather all these scattered emails and they turn them into a unified tracker. When we compress that reality for a resume bullet, we get something like created shared onboarding checklist during high turnover, coordinating manager input to improve consistency for new hires.
Right. A very clean, polished sentence.
Exactly. It's compressed. It includes the accurate action, the appropriate scope, and the supported value. It leaves out the messy, chaotic details because a resume is meant to be compressed.
But it leaves out the reality of the mess.
Yes, temporarily. But when that professional sits down for the interview, they have to rehydrate that claim. They don't just repeat the bullet point word for word. They explain the situation, that critical information was buried in scattered emails.
Okay.
They explain the action, which was drafting the tracker, and they provide the evidence that managers actually used it in weekly meetings. These two versions aren't contradictory. One is simply the concentrated form of the other.
But are they really the same truth, honestly?
Think of it like cartography. I mean, a street map, a topographical map, and a subway map all render the exact same city truthfully.
Okay. I like that analogy.
They don't contradict each other, but they do it for completely different purposes. You wouldn't use a topographical map to figure out which train to catch, right?
Obviously not.
The resume is the subway map. It gets the recruiter from point A to point B instantly. The interview is the topographical map. It shows the hiring manager the elevation, the rough terrain, all the obstacles you actually had to climb over.
Look, I love the cartography analogy, but consider what happens when you hand the wrong map to the wrong person.
How so?
If you give a hiker traversing a mountain range a subway map, they aren't just going to be confused, they're going to walk off a cliff.
That's a little dramatic, don't you think?
No, I'm serious. When we talk about compression, removing critical context, we are talking about removing the very essence of the work.
But the resume bullet is just an entry point. It's an invitation.
Because context is everything. Let's look closely at your onboarding example. The resume bullet says you coordinated manager input to improve consistency.
Right.
Now, in a highly compressed format, that sounds incredibly strategic. To a recruiter reading fast, it sounds like organizational leadership.
I mean, it is a form of leadership.
But when we rehydrate it in the interview, we find out the reality was gathering scattered emails into a spreadsheet. If your compression removes the operational constraints, if it leaves out the fact that you were just wrangling basic administrative chaos, you aren't just summarizing the truth.
You're still explaining the value provided, though.
You are flattening it into what the framework itself warns against: generic professionalism.
But the bullet didn't claim executive leadership. It just said coordinated.
No, but it implies a level of altitude that simply isn't there. The hiring manager reads coordinated manager input and expects a seasoned operational leader.
Do they, though, from a single bullet point?
Yes, they often do. And when the interview rehydrates the truth into, well, I dug through my inbox and made a tracker, the trust is broken. The subway map promised a straight, smooth line. The topographical reality was a rocky, tactical climb. You really can't blame the hiring manager for feeling misled.
I hear your concern. I really do. But consider the alternative. And consider the guardrails the framework actually puts in place to prevent that exact scenario.
Okay, what guardrails?
Well, the framework mandates that we understand the difference between a measure of performance and a measure of effectiveness.
Right, the metrics.
Yeah. Performance asks about scale and activity, so maintaining the tracker. Effectiveness asks what changed, improving consistency for new hires. The compressed resume bullet we just discussed, it didn't invent a fake percentage.
No, it didn't.
It didn't say, reduced onboarding time by 50% without evidence. It relied on supported qualitative value.
It still sounds inflated to me.
It sounds professional, but it doesn't cross the line into fiction. It didn't claim the professional led a strategic enterprise transformation. It stated they created a checklist.
Fair enough.
The framework actually prohibits inflating ownership verbs just because you are compressing. If you only supported an initiative, you cannot write directed on the resume.
Right, that would be a lie.
Exactly. The truth remains intact because the verb created is entirely accurate to both the subway map and the topographical map. The compression is just a surface-level signal that tells the interviewer, look, there is a governed record beneath this statement. Ask me to unpack it.
Well, that relies heavily on a massive assumption.
Which is,
It assumes the person doing the rendering possesses perfect, unbiased judgment regarding what context to keep and what to omit. And frankly, human beings are terrible at unbiased judgment when their livelihood is on the line.
true, but we have tools for that.
But you bring up flattening context, which is dangerous enough with normal everyday work. What happens when omitting context isn't just a choice, but a strict legal requirement?
Ah, you're talking about confidential work.
Exactly. Let's look at public safe rendering. We have to look at the most extreme form of context omission here.
Right, the framework provides a healthcare example for this.
Yes, imagine a professional has a private record involving highly confidential patient intake data, internal workflow changes at a specific hospital, and a deeply sensitive review of a billing process.
Stuff you absolutely cannot share publicly.
Exactly. And the framework advises taking that highly specific, highly complex reality and rendering it publicly as supported documentation coordination during a regulated healthcare implementation.
Which is a completely accurate summary of the capability.
I'm sorry, I don't buy that this is the same truth.
Why not?
If you completely strip out the client name, the patient data metrics, the proprietary software system, and the confidential financial outcome, is it actually the same truth, or is it just a vaguely accurate shadow?
It's the essence of the work.
But regulated healthcare implementation could mean you deployed a multi-million-dollar electronic health record system across 10 hospitals. Or it could mean you updated a PDF form for a local dental clinic.
Well,
By stripping all identifying context to make it public safe, you are creating an abstraction that borders on underclaiming to the point of uselessness.
let's pause there because you are equating granular exposure with truth. And those are two very different things.
Without granular detail, how can a hiring manager possibly verify the truth?
Think about the professional's reality for a second. If a person cannot legally, ethically, or contractually reveal patient data, but they desperately need to prove to the market that they have the capability to manage complex regulated implementations, what is their alternative?
Do they simply leave a 3-year blank gap on their resume? Do they violate a non-disclosure agreement just to impress a recruiter?
Of course not, but
The framework establishes a non-negotiable rule. Evidence is not exposure. Privacy is a necessary boundary of professional truth. It's still omitting the core of the work, though.
the public safe rendering preserves the essential professional meaning, documentation, coordination, regulated environment, stakeholder support, without violating the trust of the employer or the patient.
It's a silhouette.
It is a governed silhouette, and it's honest because it accurately describes the capability demonstrated in the private record, tailored for an audience that has absolutely no legal right to see the underlying proprietary details.
Right.
It signals to a recruiter that the capability exists. That gets you in the room. Then, during the interview, the professional can say, look, I cannot disclose the client name, but I can speak at length to the methodology I use to secure patient intake data.
Okay, I see the utility there.
The truth of the capability is completely preserved. Only the exposure of the data is restricted.
But a silhouette lacks depth, color, and texture. And when an entire market of professionals is submitting silhouettes to automated hiring systems, they all just look identically generic.
That's a fair critique of the current job market, sure.
But let's put that aside for a moment. Let's accept that privacy requires this extreme form of omission. If we accept that, we then have to confront how a human being actually manages this. How do we prevent this from devolving into total professional amnesia?
Well, this is exactly where the operational safeguards come in.
Right. The framework leans incredibly hard on the idea of a central log, a rendering bank, a decision filter, to keep all these tailored surfaces tied to reality.
Tool 4B and Tool 4C, yeah?
Right. The theory is that before you draft a single word for a resume or a LinkedIn profile, you run it through a filter. You define a purpose, the target audience, the source-backed claim, and the privacy limits.
Which is essential.
And then, crucially, you store every single iteration you create in a centralized log, so you don't forget what you said to whom.
Yes, exactly. Think of it almost like a strict version control system in software engineering.
Like GitHub.
Like GitHub, if you've ever used it, you know there is a main code base, the trunk. And then developers create branches to work on specific features. Your living professional record is the trunk. It is the absolute immutable truth.
In theory.
Every resume bullet, every networking message, every portfolio summary is a branch. You aren't out in the market inventing new identities. You are deploying targeted, logged outputs that trace directly back to the trunk.
But human beings are not code bases. Our memories are not immutable servers.
Well, the log is the server.
Let's talk about the cognitive load required to actually maintain this in the real world. The sheer volume of tailored surfaces this framework encourages is staggering.
It takes work, I'll admit that.
You have a highly compressed rendering for the automated screener, you have a slightly expanded one for the hiring manager, you have a public safe one for your LinkedIn bio, you have a highly contextualized one for your portfolio.
All mapped to the same underlying record.
Yes, mapped on paper. But think about the professional sitting in the hot seat during a dynamic live interview. The cognitive load required to mentally access all these disparate branches instantly is immense.
I mean, they just have to know their own work.
You have to remember, wait, did I tell the specific interviewer the public safe version or did I give them the compressed metric version?
Their framework demands you review that beforehand.
It asks vital questions, sure. Is the measure supported? Does it avoid overclaiming? What context did I leave out? But the temptation to let the surface drift from the source to sound just a little more impressive is a constant, overwhelming gravitational pull.
I don't disagree that the temptation exists, but the system is designed precisely to counter that gravitational pull.
AI makes this infinitely worse, by the way. Let's walk through a real scenario.
Oh, AI drift is a huge issue.
Exactly. A user takes their boring, fact-based bullet point and feeds it into ChatGPT to make it sound more professional. The AI doesn't know about governed sources, it just knows how to sound confident.
Right. It hallucinates competence.
So it changes the verb from supported to spearheaded. It changes coordinated workflow to optimized enterprise operations. The human reads it, thinks, wow, I sound amazing, and pastes it into the resume.
And they just severed the branch from the trunk.
Yes, the tools alone cannot solve the human incentive to win the job. The moment a professional is under pressure, they will default to the most impressive sounding rendering, regardless of what their central log says.
You're highlighting the exact problem the framework solves, though. Without a central log, without a strict decision filter dictating the boundaries beforehand, professionals already suffer from surface amnesia.
True, they do.
They already let AI hallucinate their achievements because they lack a governed source to check it against. The framework doesn't introduce the complexity of multiple audiences. The modern job market dictates that complexity. You have to tailor to survive.
But tailoring invites the lie.
Only if it's untethered. Walk through the scenario of the night before an interview. If you don't have a system, you are staring at a blank wall, sweating, trying to remember what version of your resume you submitted 3 weeks ago.
We've all been there.
And wondering if you can back up the AI-generated buzzwords you left in there. It's terrifying. Now look at it with the framework. You open your central log, you see the exact tailored bullet you submitted to the specific company.
Right.
Right beneath it, you see the unvarnished factual source entry from your record that you used to write it. You are literally reviewing your own truth. You are reminding yourself of the specific constraints you chose to highlight for this specific conversation.
So it acts as a reality check.
Exactly. It reduces the cognitive load rather than increasing it, because you never have to remember a lie. You only have to remember the truth and the specific lens through which you decided to share it with that particular audience.
I see what you're saying.
If an AI suggests spearheaded, the governance protocol forces you to look at your log, realize you only supported the project, and reject the AI's drift. The discipline protects you.
All right, I will concede that point. A disciplined professional rigorously adhering to a central log and meticulously tracking their tailored surfaces is far safer than someone letting a generative AI rewrite their entire history unsupervised.
100%.
If you actually use the system, it is a powerful defense mechanism. But we must acknowledge the fragility of the human element in this system.
Meaning what, exactly?
The core doctrine that different renderings can be truthful when they come from the same governed source is incredibly contingent on the word governed.
Well, yes, that's the linchpin.
The moment the professional stops asking what version of the truth belongs here and starts asking, what does this specific hiring manager want to hear to give me a higher salary, the governance fails.
That's a breach of the framework, yes.
The line between governed selection and strategic invention is razor thin. If I selectively omit every project failure, every constrained budget, and every missed deadline, and I only ever render the flawless executions,
You're still pulling from facts.
I may be pulling from a governed source, sure, but the resulting surface is a fundamental misrepresentation of my holistic reality as an employee.
Okay, let me challenge that directly. Selecting the best evidence of your capability for a job application is not a misrepresentation. It is the fundamental purpose of professional translation.
But it paints a skewed picture.
A resume is not an autobiography. It is not a sworn legal deposition of every mistake you've ever made.
No, but it shouldn't be a highlight reel of half-truths either.
It is a purpose-specific surface meant to generate enough confidence for the next interpretive event, which is the interview. The framework teaches that context omission is an audience decision.
Right.
You leave out what is unsafe, like we discussed with the public safe rendering. You leave out what distracts, and you leave out what simply isn't necessary for the audience to understand your core value pattern.
I get that.
If a past failure isn't relevant to the capability you are demonstrating for this specific role, omitting it isn't lying. It is editing for clarity. As long as the claims you do make are undeniably supported by evidence in your record, the rendering remains absolutely truthful.
Editing for clarity is one thing. Editing for continuous unbroken victory is another. But I think this brings us to a crucial point of convergence, actually.
Oh, let's hear it.
We both recognize the immense danger of what happens when you just polish a surface without substance.
Yes, absolutely. Rendering without governance is just polish. It's marketing devoid of reality.
Right. We agree that if a professional is going to present different surfaces to the world, if they are going to hand the recruiter the subway map and the hiring manager the topographical map, they have to manage those maps with ruthless discipline.
They have to track the branches back to the trunk.
Exactly. The moment they untether their LinkedIn profile or their portfolio summary from the exact evidence they have documented, they've crossed over into invention. They're just making it up.
We are entirely aligned on that. The ultimate takeaway here is that the surface is not the source. The rendering must absolutely answer to the record.
It has to.
As long as that chain of custody is maintained, different renderings are practical, ethical necessity in a complex world. A professional can truthfully compress for a resume, rehydrate for an interview, and contextualize for a portfolio.
As long as they keep the receipts.
Exactly. And in doing so, they protect their integrity rather than compromise it.
I maintain a highly cautious stance on our collective ability as humans to perfectly execute that chain of custody without falling prey to market pressures. We all want the job, we all want to look good.
It's human nature.
But the framework itself, if followed strictly, provides the best possible defense against that human temptation to exaggerate. It demands a level of evidence literacy that most professionals, frankly, just have never been trained to apply to their own careers.
Which is exactly why exploring this material is so critical for anyone navigating the modern job market. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt like a fraud tailoring your resume for a job you desperately need, this framework is designed to eliminate that exact feeling.
It gives you a bedrock of facts to stand on.
It really does. Examining professional communication through this rigorous lens forces us to confront how we manage our own narratives. There is a great deal more to explore regarding evidence literacy in the broader material, and we encourage everyone to really dig into it.
Absolutely. It makes you question every single bullet point you've ever written about yourself and forces you to ask, can I actually prove this?
Which brings us back to where we started. You have to adapt to survive in this market. You have to show different angles of your professional history to different people at different times.
You really do.
But if the core foundation isn't real, if you aren't accountable to the facts, well, it doesn't matter how beautifully you tailor the surface.
An illusion is still an illusion, no matter how many ways you try to explain it.
All said, we'll leave it there for today. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of truth, translation, and the professional record. We'll see you next time on The Debate.